Welcome to the RJLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to discuss nuclear brinksmanship in the 2020s. I want to develop today's podcast in 3 steps. First, I want to talk about some evidence that the nuclear option, if it ever was off the table, is certainly on the table now. Secondly, I want to make the argument that mutually assured destruction does not really hold. And lastly, I want to talk about what we could possibly do. First, some evidence. We see that a lot of politicians nowadays, especially those in the West, especially those from Britain in the European Commission, and of course in the United States, cannot stop talking about the use of nuclear weapons. And if we know that the United States has never promised, has never precluded first use, right? And they always like to talk about Putin's nuclear threats. And at this point, I want to criticize also not just those politicians who really are making threats themselves, but I also want to criticize some of the Russophiles who like to pretend that Putin has never threatened the use of nuclear weapons. Well, explicitly no, because Putin, the guy is quite cultured. So when he makes threats, he does not make it so explicitly. So he, unlike Tony Blinken, for example, he never said that if the West uses nuclear weapons, we will reciprocate. But what he said is basically we will reciprocate whatever attack that the West does, NATO does, and everything is on the table. Essentially, that is a threat of use of nuclear weapons. But it's an implicit threat. So that's the point that I want to make here. All right, so where was I? I was talking about these threats by the politicians, but also in the media. I think I've been actually I've been doing this for years. I've been going on and off the British tabloids from time to time. I just find it quite interesting from time to time to see how people hate on each other. And I just find that on these British tabloids, they cannot stop talking about nuclear war for a day. Every day, nowadays there are 3 things that they talk about. They talk about Liz Truss, how she's disastrous, and Boris Johnson should be back. They talk about Meghan Markle, how she is whatever she is, but she is bad. But never because she is black. And finally, they like to talk about Putin and nuclear war. So I think this is really preparing people for mentally, psychologically, for nuclear war. And of course, we have this public service announcements in New York City, where basically the government prepares people, the residents of New York City, of a nuclear attack. And finally, I have also read, even in some Chinese social media, people, I don't know whether they wrote it themselves or they translated some articles, but basically talking about how nuclear weapons are not as devastating, are not as devastating as they are, as they are made out to be. And this person made the argument that sorry, I think some saliva went into my throat. I'm not sick. This person made the argument that that nuclear weapons are made out to be so devastating because those nuclear powers wanted so that they can keep their stranglehold, their dominance over countries, smaller countries that lack nuclear weapons. this person made some valid arguments, but I think the most important argument that this person makes, and I think he is right in this regard, is that the threat of a nuclear winter is greatly exaggerated, because the amount of nuclear warheads that are made by man, tens of thousands, are simply not enough. I think not enough. I agree that this person made the argument. I think it is indeed not enough to cause a nuclear winter. It will be highly devastating, obviously, to the cities, to the targets, because hundreds of thousands will die per nuclear bomb. But the effects are mostly local, not really global. All right, so that's the first point. We see that whether it's the politicians, whether it's the media, even social media, everywhere people are being prepared mentally, psychologically for the use of nuclear weapons. And then we want to talk about the second step. I want to talk about just some basic understanding of the game, right? Because in game theory, we talk about equilibrium. We know that there are some games don't have any equilibrium, and some games may have several Nash equilibria. The idea is that you can't improve at an equilibrium. You can't improve on the outcome, provided that the other party is not making any move. Does not change its position. But I think this idea of mutually assured destruction, in fact, in my dissertation, when I did my PhD, I also talked about mutually assured destruction, but of course I was talking it in the context of contract negotiation and etc. Blah, 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 blah. But just in the nuclear context, I don't necessarily think that this mutually assured destruction is valid. Let me explain why. And since we are talking about the West, and the West talk about Russia using nuclear weapons, let's just suppose that Russia uses nuclear weapons first. Let's say Russia uses a nuclear weapon on, let's say, perhaps Poland, perhaps Ukraine. Let's say the border between Poland and Ukraine. Okay. What would the Americans and NATO do? Now we say that most likely, now we say that they're perfectly committed to a nuclear reciprocation. They will also attack Russia using nuclear weapons. They will probably use a single tactical nuclear warhead. But if they really use one single nuclear warhead on Russia, they can expect that Russia would escalate. It will no longer be a tactical nuclear weapon. It will be a strategic attack. And a strategic attack will be on the nuclear and the military facilities of NATO in Europe and in the United States. So are they ready to, because they already took they've already taken one nuclear bomb in Poland. Are they ready to take 1,000 more nuclear bombs? Because Russia has demonstrated that Russia has already, at this point, in this hypothetical scenario, Russia would have already used nuclear weapon. They have shown that they are perfectly fine using it. Is NATO really ready to use nuclear weapon and have certainty of having full retaliation? And of course, you can say maybe at this point, since NATO understands that if it retaliates using a tactical attack, that would provoke Russia's strategic attack. So they would one up They would skip reciprocation and go directly to escalation. So if immediately after Russia uses a tactical attack, they directly go to strategic attack on the entire military and nuclear infrastructure of Russia. What would Russia do? Well, Russia senses that NATO has done that. Then Russia would launch a strategic plus attack, meaning that they would shoot everything it has. It would shoot everything it has, not only on the nuclear and military targets of NATO, but also all the major cities: New York City, Philadelphia, Washington D.C., Miami, Dallas, Fort Worth, Chicago, whatever, San Francisco, etc. London, of course, Paris, Rome, everywhere, and everywhere will be destroyed. Knowing this, what would NATO do, right? I think a lot of, at that point, people would realize that, in fact, whoever takes the first nuclear attack does not necessarily need to be afraid of getting a second, a reciprocal attack, because the other party does not really gain anything. This party who has already taken a nuclear bomb, can really attack, but the final, that would be reciprocated by complete annihilation. And by annihilation, it means reduced to nothing, right? And all these politicians, are they really ready to die? All those business leaders, are they ready to die? I don't think so. So I think very likely that the side that uses nuclear weapons first is very likely to basically use it for free. And it will lead to very likely the collapse of the other side politically, because people got angry domestically and they want retaliation, but they would not be, but the government officials are too afraid to use it. I think this is perfectly depicted in the argument of that crazy professor in the, I think there was a film called Fail Safe. This film, it's really a classic. I think I like it even better than Doctor Strangelove, but because it came out around the same time and the studio didn't market it with a lot of money, it didn't gain enough fame, and just because it came out right after Doctor Strangelove, it's not as iconic as a result. But in this film, there is a professor, and this professor is a professor of political science, and he's a game theorist, and he made the argument that at that point, if you don't know that film, and this is spoiler alert, by the way, that okay, I'm not going to talk about the plot of the film. I think anyone who hasn't watched it and is interested can just watch it. But essentially, the argument is like the one that I made. Basically, that the country, the side that has taken a nuclear attack, is unlikely to really mount a retaliation, because they are afraid of escalation, and political leaders are afraid to die. I think that is very likely to actually be the case. So I think both sides know this, and this makes the entire situation highly unstable. I think it is still not very likely that nuclear weapons eventually will be used, but it looks increasingly likely that particularly NATO is preparing to use it. And I think this is something somewhat worrying. It is indeed worrying. If the Russians don't get their act together and conclude the conflict quickly, I think it is foreseeable that in the following years we will see, if this becomes a quote-unquote forever war, I think at some point technical nuclear weapons will be used. And that will be disastrous for the Ukrainian people, by the way. And also I think it could lead to a collapse of the Russian government. So that is something that we must keep in mind. And finally, what can we do? Obviously, we know that I don't think that any of us can do anything to prevent any nuclear war. We just need to, be cognizant of this fact that the nuclear weapon option is fully on the table. We need to pay attention to international events and geopolitics and conflicts. And when things heat up, when things seem on the brink, we leave we avoid being physically in some of these priority target areas. Right, so that means, say, if I'm British, for example, I would go to Scotland, perhaps. I would avoid being near London, for example. Sorry. That's basically all that we can do. All right, so this is my take on nuclear brinksmanship. And I think this is a dangerous game. And just as previously brinksmanships have been played, sometimes things get resolved and the worst do not come. But sometimes things do not get resolved properly, and bad comes to worse and worse goes to worst. I don't know exactly what was the expression, but you get the drift. Thank you for listening, and I have also Twitter and Telegram channels, so I encourage you to follow and subscribe. Thank you very much. Have a great day.